Greetings! My name is Drew Nelson, and I am the Vice President of Policy, Programs, and Strategy at Project Interspace. For those that don't know, Project Interspace is a nonprofit advocacy organization working to catalyze next-generation geothermal as a source of clean, firm energy, industrial heat, and heating and cooling for buildings. We're doing this by identifying and overcoming barriers to implementing next-gen geothermal, one of which is figuring out where to put the projects. In traditional geothermal, it's pretty clear where there's potential. In places like Iceland and California, hot water is coming to the surface. But with next generation geothermal, the potential is huge since we are engineering systems to tap into the Earth's heat anywhere, not just where the hot water is bubbling up. But because of that, it isn't always clear where the best places are to drill. Interspace saw an opportunity to overcome this barrier by raising philanthropic funds to work with 85 leading scientists across the globe and with Google to create a tool that identifies these opportunities. This tool, GeoMap, launched last winter at the COP with analysis of Africa. North America, which is what we're looking at today, is the second region. India and Indonesia will follow later this year, then Brazil early in 2025, and the rest of the world soon thereafter. For North America, this extraordinary team of surface and subsurface experts has created over 150 layers of data that allows anybody to do analysis and see where the opportunities are. One of my major takeaways from this data is that there are big parts of North America that have untapped geothermal potential. GeoMap also has lots of cool features that the team will talk through today, including allowing users to understand subsurface heat at various depths, overlay surface features like where there are tax incentives, and rank various sites based on their potential. From there, a user can then work in the test module to do techno-economic analysis of these specific sites. I'm biased, but GeoMap is pretty fantastic, and it's exciting that there's such a wide range of folks that have signed up to join this demo, from federal employees and Hill staff to startup geothermal companies to venture capitalists to academics to oil and gas companies and most everything in between. Before I turn it over to the team to have them walk you through the tool, I want to highlight a few things. If you haven't already muted yourself, please be sure to do so. And we have reserved about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. Please hold your verbal questions until then, but feel free to put questions in the chat at any point. And for our reporter friends who have joined, the rest of this demo is on background in order to encourage good questions and discussion. If you'd like to have a deeper dive with the team about your area of interest, reach out to me and I'd be happy to help set something up. I'll put my email here in the chat in a second. So thank you for your interest. And finally, I also want to thank the team you'll hear from today. Each of these folks have spent months of hard work to pull together this amazing tool. We wouldn't be here today without their work and dedication and are grateful to their effort. And with that, I present to you GeoMap North America. Helen, take it away.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Really nice to see so many familiar faces on the call and so many new faces as well. So I'm Helen Dorn. I'm the lead geologist for Project Interspace, and I'm really going to talk today about the subsurface part of GeoMap, or the subsurface module as we call it. But because I'm first up, I want to spend just a few minutes navigating you guys through GeoMap. And given it's free, it's online, and it's on the Project Interspace website, I suggest that if you're at your computer, go on, log in, and you can kind of follow me as I click through the different layers in the journey. So essentially, GeoMap is subdivided into three principal components on your screen. The map that you see in front obviously dominates, and that's our viewer. On the right-hand side, we have a suite of navigational bars. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then on the left-hand side, we have what we call our data library. So there's loads of ways you can zoom around GeoMap. You can grab the little toggle and simply rotate. Or we have some functionality where you can very quickly go to different regions, such as the US, Europe, North America, or sorry, excuse me, Middle East and North Africa. You can take a global view in. You can view it on a flat map or on the globe and simply go back to the US. Or you can go into your very own latitude, longitude if you've got a particular place that you want to visit. And if you're like me, then you've put in your house and seen the geothermal potential right beneath where you live. So those are the basic functionalities in terms of navigation. There's a number of different base layer maps to aid your visual experience. So some of the subsurface layers actually look better on a dark background or on a hillshade topography background. So you can go ahead and play with those. And we have this little toolbar here called the site comparison tool that my colleague Ryan will talk to you about in just a few minutes. So we'll leave that little surprise for him, but that's a really great new feature that we've added in, and you'll see it on your right-hand panel. So on the left is where we have our data essentially. Now we have 150 new data layers in GeoMap. So this is a pretty long database library. To aid your user-friendly finding of each layer, we've subdivided it by geography. So you have a global layer, a layer for Africa, which was the first module we released. There's a layer for North America, and then some sub-layers underneath, such as in certain areas, we have only been able to do work across the US, or we have layers that are only related to the US, or with layers that are only related to Nigeria. So it's got a hierarchy of geography based upon it. Now, in each of those geographical areas, there are 3 different module types. And if you look in global here, down at the bottom left-hand corner, you can see that there's a subsurface module, a surface module, and an analysis module. And I'm going to talk today about the subsurface module, and it's further divided into these titled systems where you can, with layers underneath. So we have tectonics, advection, heat source proximity, heat flow, gases, and critical minerals. And all of this is designed to help you find individual layers. So like, if we go up here, a few other features worthy of note. GeoMap's designed to be both interactive but also educational. So every layer that we've put in, we've actually got this information key against each layer. We want you to understand why the layer is useful for geothermal, the description of the layer, and very importantly, the citation behind the layer. So this is the tectonic facies. It's a beautiful new layer made by our phase 1 scientists. It's obviously got these beautiful colors, and you're probably wondering, what do they mean? Well, underneath each layer, there is a key. So here we have the list or the legend that relates to what you see in the map. Now, if you're like me and think, well, there's a lot of pink in there, what's the difference here between continental volcanic arc crust of 40 kilometers and 30? Yep, it's quite hard to see in the legend. So for your functionality, we've also a tooltip. So we can click anywhere on the map, and that helps relate us back to the legend. So this is kind of the functionality around GeoMap. And as I mentioned, I'm going to talk today about the phase or the subsurface module. So we have this amazing group of global scientists that help create data for the subsurface module. 85 across multiple institutes, literally spread out across the world. And this tectonic facies and crustal facies with all the faults behind it is one of the layers that they have created. But we don't just create layers ourselves and add them to GeoMap. We see the power in combining and integrating layers that already exist out there. And we've done this by adding some really amazing layers that have been produced from institutions like USGS, NREL, the State Geologist Department. So you can see I'll toggle on here. This is a database of thermal springs with behind each one of them, we have temperature and sometimes the name of the thermal spring. They have all been brought in. We have also really wonderful layers created from the USGS and NREL and the state geologists identifying known geothermal systems. So those are all brought in to GeoMap to help inform the user of exactly what information is out there for a particular area. So like I mentioned, the phase 1 scientists have created a number of layers, and a lot of their research has been focused on the layers of the earth. So the crust, the sediment, the depth to the moho, and the depth to the stenosphere. And the reason we focus on these layers is that combined, they fundamentally dictate heat flow. These are the contributors to the heat flow that you measure on the surface. So they play a really important role in geothermal. Not only that, they also help us understand what type of geothermal we may be looking to explore for in an area. So For example, in enhanced geothermal systems, or EGS, you want to be looking for areas where hot, dry rock is relatively close to the surface. And two conditions that dictate that a little bit are thickness of sediments and thickness of the crust. So what we really want to understand actually for EGS is where are the areas of thin crust and thin sediment. And so we have layers of both of those created from our scientists in GeoMap, and we can actually start to compare these layers. So if I turn on this beautiful colored one that is a sediment thickness map, you can see down here is the Gulf of Mexico in this red colors, where the sediment thickness reaches up to 12 kilometers. The blue colors are much thinner sediment piles. And if we just toggle the opacity, the layer behind that is that crustal thickness. And here in the Great Basin, we have relatively thin crust. So the red's being thin crust, the blue being thicker. So what we want to look for EGS are areas of thin crust and thin sediment piles. We can compare these two maps and try and find that. And actually what we did for you, just to ease, is create a little polygon of the areas where we have both thin crust and thin sediment to help you think about what type of geothermal resource you could explore for. Of course, that's not the only thing important for EGS. There's loads of other considerations that you'd have to take into account, such as the rock properties, the rock type, the pre-existing fracture networks, the stress regime around the faults and potential propagation, and the seismic hazard risk. And we have some of these layers also within GeoMap. Now, these layers, we have a global layer of seismic hazard risk. And so you need now to go down to the global database and turn on the tectonics layer, and you can see this is the seismic hazard. And if you zoom into one of the most exciting and well-known EGS sites, Forge in Utah, you can see it's in an area of thin crust, it's in an area of thin sediment, it's also outside an area of, it's in an area of low seismic risk. And we can also compare the seismic risk to the active faults. So within our tectonics database, we've highlighted which faults are active versus which ones are haven't moved in the last million years or so. So these are all the quaternary faults, and they, in many places, they dictate the seismic hazard. So we can use GeoMap to layer up multiple layers to help us understand how we might extract a geothermal resource and what areas we may look for example, for EGS. Now, in addition to having all the layers added in for this lithosphere, so the crust, the mantle, and the sediment, we also spent a long time, and our phase 1 team spent a long time looking and gathering thermal data. So we have 2 new thermal data sets within GeoMap, and I'm going to zoom out because this is really, really impressive and one of my favorite layers that we have. So if we zoom right out here, the first layer we have, and it goes back under global again, and under heat flow is the brand new data set from the International Heat Flow Commission. And you can see this is a global data set. So they've updated it, and it was released in the EGU just after Easter. And it's an amazing accomplishment by them. So we have it and color coded by temperature. And you can see the key here. To this data set, we have added in a bottom hole temperature data set. And you'll find it up at the top and under analysis mode. And we call it the Project Interspace US temperature data set. And this data set has been compiled by a group of scientists from 45 individual publications, spanning decades and decades of work. They've been brought together, looked at, analyzed for duplicates, for anomalies, for erroneous measurements, and filtered. And in total, we now have 1.3 million temperature data points in GeoMap. So if I just zoom in here, they've been color coded by temperature, and you can use the tooltip to understand the exact temperature where we have it. But we've also created a feature where we can actually filter these, because it's hard to see 1.3 million data points on a map. So we have created this feature where we can actually filter by temperature, and you can see these really beautiful hot and deep wells here in the Gulf Coast. And if we turn on another one of my favorite layers, the temperature of the base sediment, you can see how beautifully this database correlates to that temperature of the base sediment. So if I just turn it off, you can see the Gulf Coast region, not only is it hot because it has thin crust and a shallow asthenosphere, but it's also been drilled really, really deep, and it goes down to 12 kilometers. So it has huge, the temperatures at the base of sediment in the Gulf Coast reach right up to above 400 degrees centigrade. And if we turn on the temperature data set that's been filtered, you can see how beautifully the temperature database and the bottom and the base of temperature, the temperature of the base sediment match so beautifully. So this has been a really, really amazing database to add in. And because we have so much data now, or temperature data, we can actually build relatively robust thermal models around that. And that's exciting because it helps us then produce maps to guide the user on how to use GeoMap. So, for example, from this temperature database, not only have we been able to produce this temperature-based sediment map, but we've also been able to create these isothermal depth maps. And the one you see on your screen now is at 150 degrees centigrade. In areas that are green, it's shallower to reach that temperature than the areas that are red. And you can see that on the tooltip. So if you're an industrial client and you know that you have to reach a temperature of 150 degrees centigrade, then this is the type of map that you would go to. So you could use it to site a new site for an industrial plant. You would go into the green areas, or you could look at your own site and say, well, how deep would I need to drill to get to that 150? And would it be economical? And Danny will take you through the test tool piece later today, which connects beautifully with these maps that we've created. So that's one example. We've also been able to create this a temperature map at different kilometer depths. So for example, this is the temperature map at 1 kilometer depth across the entire US, and we're able to filter this. Again, just like the temperature database, we have sliding scales where you can actually filter down these maps. So if you want to look and just find temperatures that are above, say, 55, 80 degrees centigrade at depth, and it's slow because I'm in Ireland and my internet's slow, not because GeoMap's slow, so apologies for that. But if you want to filter down and find temperatures of 60, 80 degrees centigrade at 1 kilometer depth, you can do that on a map. And this is really useful for if you're a startup looking to explore for geothermal, say you're focused on Texas, this map helps you tell you where to go next. Or if you're within a state and you're a politician and you want to think about which areas in my state have most potential, these types of maps help you do that. And what we've done with the temperature database is we've combined it with the fault database and the layers that the phase 1 geologists have created, and we've created this weighted overlay analysis for the whole of the US. And again, it's filterable, so if we go right the way down, we can see again the areas that are more prospective than others in terms of favorability from the subsurface, and we can zoom right into these. So if we zoom very quickly into the Gulf Coast of Texas, we see this quite a large area, very suitable for geothermal. And the final map that I just want to show you is what we can then do is turn on the lithium concentration. So within the subsurface module for the US, we have included the USGS's lithium map. And if you zoom in here, this is an area with high lithium concentrations, and you can click on these and you can see this is the Edwards Formation. And if you turn the wells back on, you can see that there's a number of wells in this area, all producing really high temperature fluids at 170 degrees centigrade at about 4 kilometers, but also with relatively high lithium concentrations, particularly where we have deep-rooted faulting systems. And we can see that if we turn on the faults. So that's just a brief overview of some of the layers that we have. And I hope you can appreciate that regardless of whether you're an industrial client, an academic, a state politician, there are multiple layers here in GeoMap that could be useful for addressing some of the queries you have about geothermal in your regions. So with that, I will pass it over to Chloe.
Thank you, Helen. Wonderful. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and talk about some of the new surface layers with the North American release. Okay, you should be seeing the GeoMap beta. And to the questions in the chat, yes, this is publicly available, and please go ahead and log in, get access to that, and follow along with this demonstration. For talking about the surface layers, I'm going to go ahead and actually change my background to light. And so I'm going to be focusing on the United States analysis module as well as surface module. Now, these are for layers specifically for the United States of America, and I'll be focusing for the purpose of this demonstration on the continental US primarily. And so I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. When you're navigating GeoMap, you're going to find the surface analysis modules under combined favorability. And I'm going to go ahead and touch back on these really impressive layers at the end of this section. And then for the surface module, you have demand, infrastructure, incentives, and boundaries. Now for the demand section, you're going to be able to find places and facilities that have facilities that are emitting more CO2 per year. And so similar to the subsurface layers, you're going to be able to have the legend at the bottom, as well as information about each individual layer, how it's useful for geothermal, its description, and its citation. You're also going to be able to click on these individual facilities to find out what its emissions are, what its facility it is, to be able to really highlight potentially where your facilities of interest may be as you explore GeoMap and thinking about demand and thinking about what could be a good area for transitioning to geothermal energy. Also within the surface module, you have many demand layers from NREL. And so this is visualizing the demand by sector. So this is an example of the agricultural heating demand. We also have data cooling, commercial demand layers, manufacturing demand layers, as well as residential demand. And so depending on how you're wanting to use this tool, you can visualize a lot of different ways and think about what sort of demand in your area of interest there is. And again, you can click on these individuals' icons to be able to see what county you're looking at, as well as that potentially greenhouse heat consumption, or in the case of data centers, you can look at areas that have cooling demand. And so thinking about demand and thinking about how that intersects with transitioning to geothermal, you also have broad utility electricity sales. And so for areas that have high electricity demands and sales, you can think about what may be good to transition. Outside of demand, we also have infrastructure. And so these are the power lines, boreholes, the point source facilities, again, those emissions points that are producing CO2 that could be converted, as well as very interestingly, the Bureau of Land Management's National Geothermal Leases database. Now, this is an interesting data set to see where on BLM land geothermal leases are either currently in progress or have historically been. We also have military installations and electrical retail service territories, which dovetails pretty nicely with that utility layer. Now, for incentives. Incentives are something where you might have a place, facility that in an area that could transition to geothermal, but maybe it is economically, there's an economic barrier to that transition. There are also a lot of economic incentives to transitioning to clean energy, including the U.S. Qualified Opportunity Zones, which are areas where, per the IRS, they are economically distressed communities where new investments can be eligible for preferential tax treatment. We also have energy communities for the IRA Low Income Community Bonus Credit Program. Energy communities that have incentives for the fabulous Inflation Reduction Act. And so this particular layer is looking at energy communities that are defined based off of coal closures. And so in red, you're seeing communities where there was a coal closure, and in green, you're seeing areas that are adjacent to coal closures. And so under the Inflation Reduction Act, these regions have increased incentives, tax incentives to transition energy in these areas. We also have this wonderful layer around the metropolitan statistical areas that meet a particular economic statistic for the energy sector. And so when taking all of these layers into account, you can identify places within the United States, in the continental United States in this case, that have economic incentives for transition to geothermal energy, which I think is a pretty wonderful visualization. Additionally, under the surface module, we have boundaries. If you're looking at a subsurface layer and you're wondering what state is that in or what county, this is a place where you can come to be able to add in what county that is. And this will also pull up the tooltip, where if you have multiple layers on at once, you're going to be able to see the tooltip and information for each layer at the same time. Now, a particular potential interest under boundaries is the USGS protected areas layer. Now, this layer is pretty dense, but provides a really interesting view at protected areas that have managed biodiversity sort of management. And so specifically, I want to call out areas that are in yellow, which are GAP status 3. And so these are areas that have permanent protections from conversion, but also allow low-level extractive uses such as mining. And so taking into account protected areas, potential administrative boundaries, really a user of GeoMap can layer in a lot of different things to think about for policy or what might be impacting your decision to invest in a particular area. Now, those were all pretty public. Those are all public third-party data sets, a lot of them from NREL. And now I'm going to turn to the combined favorability modules. Now, these are analysis modules that are going to be layers that are meant to provide approximate scores for energy use conversion favorability to geothermal energy. Now, this is for use for screening potential projects. And these layers are definitely not intended to immediately inform real investment decisions, but they can be used to narrow down promising sites. And so I'm first going to show the coal plant combined weighted overlay analysis. Now, this is showing particular facilities, in this case coal plants, and providing a weighted overlay analysis. Here, similar to some of the subsurface weighted overlay analysis layers that Helen was showing, we are seeing a ranked 1 through 5. Detailed descriptions of each layer are in the information section, but broadly, these layers are the output of expert-defined weighted averaging formulas, accounting for layers, including the subsurface weighted overlay analysis. Other factors that are also taken into account are aquifer risk, seismic hazard, as well as energy communities and opportunity zone incentives. For the coal plants, we have also used the existing plant's annual CO2 emissions and remaining plant lifetime. And so if you click in on an individual facility, you're going to be able to see the name of the station, that in the case of coal, the type of coal, and near the end of it, you see the remaining plant life, as well as the combined weighted overlay analysis score, as well as the individual subsurface score. So this is going to be allowing individuals to poke around and see what sites might be of interest for and really good places for investment. Similar to the subsurface, we also have this filtering tool. So right now I'm looking at the continental United States. If I want to go ahead and find facilities that have a combined weighted overlay analysis score of more than 2, or let's say more than 3, I can go ahead and filter down. And so this allows the user to, at whatever scale they choose, to filter to find their best potential prospects. And so if I was to look at a more specific location, like Texas, I can go ahead and filter to find maybe a good sort of initial space to take a look at those facilities. So for the combined favorability, there's coal plants, industrial heat, as well as military bases. And all of those weighted overlay analysis are available to users of GeoMap. I'm now going to go ahead and pass the baton to my colleague, Ryan, who's going to talk a little bit more about site comparisons. Because for surface, we've talked about individual facilities. But what if you want to compare facilities? What's next? So go ahead and take it away, Ryan. I'm going to go ahead and stop.
All right. Can you see it? Okay, looks good. Great. Okay. So my name is Ryan, and I am a software engineer for GeoMap. This is important because I am not a geologist. I don't really understand all of the layers. I'm more of a, let's say, a normal user. And this is important because that is what I'm going to go over. How does a normal user who doesn't necessarily know a lot about all of these layers, these surface layers, these subsurface layers, how do we go about using it? And we have like 2 methods for this. The first method is going to be somewhat simple. We're going to go to the checkboxes on the left, and I'm going to pick United States because this is what we have. Analysis module, subsurface favorability, open that, and we're going to use the subsurface favorability layer underneath that. So what this shows us is going to be the favorability for geothermal prospects all throughout the country, and this is only focusing on the geology of it, nothing on the surface, nothing about communities or policies or anything of that sort. It's just the subsurface. And so what I can do is, right now you can see obviously this red spot in the left of the continental United States. That means it's favorable, right? It says exceptional on the legend, high, significant, we're looking for orange. All right, and we understand that, that's great. But for example, I'm going to turn on state boundaries right now. I'm going to go to some place like Oklahoma. We don't have a lot of red here, we don't have a lot of orange, but we still have some sort of yellow. So that means it's promising for geothermal prospects. And it's not very obvious, however, where all of those are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this down here. Beneath the opacity slider, sometimes we have this. This is a filter slider. It's got 2 handles on it. What you're going to do is you're going to take this one here and we're going to increase that range. We're going to filter out all the lowest values. So now I don't have anything below 1. I don't have anything below 1.5. And you can see on the state of Oklahoma, we're losing some of those lower values. So, which is what we want. We now get to see sort of some new patterns here. We get to see the highest favorabilities in the state. And I can, tune it a little bit. Let's go back down a little so I can see some more. And now I can tell, it wasn't obvious before. The whole state looked kind of yellowish, kind of greenish. But now it's a little more obvious. The southeastern tip right here of Oklahoma is going to be quite favorable. But then we also have some comparably favorable points here in the eastern part in the center, and then something here in the west. I can turn it down a little bit and see a little more. And so what this tells us is if you wanted to, for example, start looking for places to look to make a geothermal plant of some sort, heating, cooling, power, these points here, these areas are areas that you might want to start looking at, where you would obviously start a new survey and then you'd actually look at the more specific details. But this is just sort of an estimate of saying, oh, you can start looking here because this is where we say, oh, it's somewhat more likely that it's favorable here. And this is the first method. We actually have a second method. This first method is going to be using sort of like a regional sort of thing, or just looking at the top spots. But the second method is a little bit more special. It's a little more new, and it's more specific. We're going to use this site comparison tool on the right-hand side of the screen. You can just open it. This site comparison tool also uses the subsurface favorability. It only uses the subsurface, only geology, nothing on the surface. So it's not going to include any of these layers from the surface module. But what we can do here with the site comparison tool is we can use it for choosing specific locations where we want to know about, where we already know their longitude and latitude, for example. Say, actually, no. To demonstrate this whole thing, I have prepared a hypothetical case study. In this case, I am a business, and I have several facilities that I want to investigate. So what I'm going to do is I am going to turn on this extra layer down here. This is a hypothetical case study. I don't actually have any facilities, but say you did. So I'm going to turn it on, and I have some points now. It's hard to see, so I'm just going to change the opacity on this so I see less of the subsurface layer. Get a dark mode instead. Okay, now I can see those points. So I have all these points on the map, and I could add these to my site comparison table. I'm going to just click Add Pins over here, and then select my points. I get to do this because I added these points directly to GeoMap, but you won't exactly have that, ease of use. So what you can do alternatively is you can add in longitude and latitude manually. And I have these points here. Let me grab my longitude. Okay, I'm just copy pasting that in. And then also my, that's latitude. And then I press this plus button here. Okay, and then it adds this point onto the map for me, right? So what this does is now I have all my locations in. I could have entered them manually. I could have entered them in with this add pins, and I can see a ranking, and I can see their scores. Based on this score from the legend, we can say, okay, this rank 1 spot, it's got a 2.0 score. That means it's, excuse me, it's likely to have good favorability for power, heat, and cooling. Everywhere else is under 2, although still high. So that's kind of saying, okay, these are good spots for at least heating and cooling, and these are the best of those spots. So we have 0.3, 4, and 5. Those seem pretty good, and they're all over here in this top left. Points for 6 and 7, not exactly that high, but they still can be good for heating and cooling. So if you needed it at these sort of locations that aren't that high, you could still look for it. Relatively speaking, I'm just going to pick 6 over 7 to start with if you wanted to get a head start on it. Now, it's not just limited to looking at just Pennsylvania. And right now I want to compare, let's say I have more facilities in Texas. I want to compare between the 2 different states. I can, well, first I'm going to actually add this point right here for a reference. This seems like the nicest hot spot, the most favorable in Pennsylvania. I'm just going to keep that there for comparison. I'm going to go to Texas. In Texas, I have some facilities that I also want to add onto my list. So I'm just going to go ahead and add these on. This is sort of a yellowish area. It seems pretty favorable, so I'm just going to start adding points. And then with this, I'll be able to see, compare this entire state almost to the favorability of Pennsylvania. Now that it's all in the same table, I can kind of see 2, 4, 6, all the way through 9. Most of the top 10 are now in Texas. That's okay, but there's some missing here. I don't see the 1. I don't see the 3rd spot, actually. So I'm going to click that. I'm going to find it. and apparently it's in Pennsylvania. So what this kind of tells me is that there's still some good spots in Pennsylvania, and it's almost comparable to, let's say, Texas's favorability. And all of these points, they're all still in the sort of this 2 range, right? That means we're getting pretty good for power. Obviously, we'd like to have it as high as possible, but this just means we're good. We're in a good range, and these are places that we might want to start investigating. And the important thing to remember here is that this site comparison tool and the subsurface favorability, they only focus on geological factors, sort of like that heat flow or seismic activity, that kind of thing, that I don't fully understand the details of, but we get this favorability that we can sort of start looking for geothermal prospects. So using this, we're going to have to get deeper into it. This table here, it shows you its rank. It's only the score for the subsurface. Then we have the longitude and latitude. I can export this file, and then I have my rankings. I can sent into a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet can be sent off to geologists, can be sent off to other people, and say, okay, this is the location that I want to start looking at first. But not only that, we have this button right here. It's under test. So if I go to test and I want to, and I click this button, what I'm going to get is, like, say, this location in the GeoMap Technoeconomic sensitivity tool. And this is going to focus more on the economic side of actually putting in those geothermal prospects, actually implementing them. And for the full explanation, I can't do this. I'm going to hand off the presentation now to my colleague, Danny. Danny, are you on? You good? All right. Okay. So he's going to go over the test tool. There's a lot of interesting things.
Hello, everyone. I'm Danny Merino. I'm a VP for Research in Project in Space. And I wanted to thank everybody for joining this webinar. The way that we see test is sort of as a translator of all the wealth of data that is available in GeoMap. And in order to translate it for people that are maybe not technical specialists, but they can still use the information available to either, let's say, work on deploying capital or work on defining policy, or basically just to understand the awareness of the capabilities of geothermal in a certain region. We have designed this test tool in a way that is easy to use, that doesn't really have barriers of entry for people that are not technical specialists, but still with that level of rigor that provides, we believe, outputs that are reasonable and useful in order to understand the potential of geothermal. It is true that the tool can be accessed through our website independently, and obviously everybody has checked their homes through the tool in Project in Space, but we emphasize that the best value comes from combining it with the maps, starting with the subsurface to understand the resource, moving into the surface, understand the demand, and where these two things match, that's where you want to run the techno-economic assessment. The way that the tool is operating is very similar. Basically, it's the same workflow as we explained in December in the initial demo that we did. That, by the way, is also in our YouTube channel, so that you can check that. It's a very good complement for this presentation. And in the end, there's some variables that whenever you ping a location via through the site comparison tool that Ryan just explained, or implementing the data sets here and click update, or just moving the cursor, just selecting whatever location, you're defining some values: surface temperature, depth to basement, temperature gradient, because they come from the maps. There's a number of sliders that define either technical or economical parameters that the user can play around to define what we call scenarios. And once that a scenario is fixed, you have an output where you're seeing the calculated variables, looking at cost, looking at payout price, sort of a break-even LCOE, but also looking at variables that are non-financial variables like abated emissions, the surface footprint, which are variables that where geothermal shines compared to other energy resources, and we consider them necessary to take the full picture, or why geothermal in many locations is going to be a preferable resource. Moving on into what we have implemented in this new version, some of the parameters have been enhanced. For example, before we had a temperature gradient that was a percentage that was a bit cumbersome. We have a simpler way of correcting the temperature gradient. You have to bear in mind that the tool is giving us, GeoMap is giving us a conduction-only heat flow and conduction-only temperature gradients, and there is information in the GeoMap data sets, and Helen explained it a little bit, that can give you hints on where you can have convection. And in those areas that you have additional information, you can basically just scratch the temperature gradient and identify what's more reasonable for you. Some of the parameters that you see here before were hidden. For example, the de-risking cost, that's a variable that is new, that accounts for the exploration phase. There are others that have been added, for example, the annual thermal temperature decline, reservoir temperature decline, that's also now user dependent. And some of the default values have been updated. In this case, the basement drilling cost multiplier has been updated to honor I'm going to call it the learning curve that we're seeing in Nevada, in Ford, or in Project Red. We're seeing that the drilling costs through granite are getting closer and closer to the references of oil and gas in sedimentary basins. So that's why the default values are, let's say, lower than before. And another thing that we have added, of course, is the heat module that allows us to explore those areas in the US that have a 2 or below 2, that, of course, for power generation may not be that reasonable, but indeed they have potential for the application of the extraction of geothermal energy for thermal direct uses. Finally, we also have a new functionality, which is the capability to export results. By clicking this button, you will get an output file that is not only looking at what are the parameters that are coming out, very similar to what you have in the interface, but a bit more detailed, but also the time series of the outputs, of the costs, that give you, let's say, a better insight on how the things are, to explore different sensitivities, but also to take this data. And as I was seeing in the chat, people were talking about lithium. Right now, we don't have a module for lithium, that will come later, but you can actually complement the results that are coming here, adding, let's say, revenue coming from lithium. I'm going to move on and do a couple of examples, taking advantage of the flow, the narrative that Ryan explained. You select several locations, you do a ranking, and you identify one location. In this case, we're looking at the frontier, the border between Mexico and the US around Nuevo Laredo. There's probably a lot of utilities, a lot of factories that require energy. And considering that we're looking here at a gradient that it's, let's say, quite reasonable, we're going to do an example looking at power. And we're going to maybe enhance our default temperature, increase it to 200. That's still is going to, by changing the temperature, you're going to be seeing that the depth is changing. So we're around 4 kilometers, which is something that I would say it's reasonable for the industry these days to reach. Depending on the amount of energy that you need, you can either increase the number of wells. In this case, for example, let's go for 20 megawatts of average net energy sales. You can increase the number of producing wells, or you can change the flow rate. I'm going to leave the flow rate for the time being. We are in Texas, so we can maybe consider, let's say, a lower drilling cost than what we consider as average. And for instance, we can come here, understand that the discount rate here may be a bit higher these days around Texas. We can ignore or consider an exploration phase, since this is probably an untapped area for geothermal. We have to consider the risking cost. And you see that even without subsidies, or IRA or equivalent, we're in an order of magnitude in our payout price that is around 100. That if you put solar plus batteries, you're going to be in that range as well. If you start increasing the subsidy, you obviously start decreasing that payout price, and then you can explore the scenarios that are, let's say, as is, or start seeing what the impact of certain policies could be. Moving from power into heat, and again, this is another example that Ryan will show. We're moving ahead further up north into Pennsylvania. This is a region where the temperature gradients are not so massive, not so high. So we're going to do a case where we're going to be exploring for one of the facilities that Ryan showed. I'm sorry, I moved this inadvertently. So I know it was a place around 28. Sorry for that. That's for doing things live. But we're going to be looking at energy generation. This is thermal use. So we don't probably need, for the kind of industry that we have here, which is food processing industry, we don't need to consider such high temperatures. So we're going to target 100 degrees Celsius. And considering that we are in a region that this is 3 kilometers, probably you have an aquifer. We can maybe explore in a scenario where we assume there's going to be an aquifer. in the zone, in the area, and looking at the thermal energy cells, we're going to put a 3 here to account for, let's say, a modest energy supply. And again, you can go further down and modify some of the parameters. In this case, we know that electricity around Pennsylvania is at 0.08. We can explore the impact of how far my location is going to be, my wells are going to be, my drilling site is going to be compared to the customer that we want to provide energy, and consider again a discount rate around 5. The risk in years, again, this is a zone that has not been tapped for geothermal yet, so we do have to consider a number of the risk in years and exploration phase. And you see again that we're reaching out, I would say, reasonable payout prices, right? Let me also emphasize that we're not only looking at payout price, we're looking at other parameters like abated emissions and surface footprint to give, let's say, the full picture of what geothermal can do in the energy transition. And last note, I know I'm running out of time, just a note on the roadmap. No, we have many initiatives in the oven to improve the opportunities that we have with this tool. On one hand, we want to provide the users the capability to explore different geothermal technologies and different applications. No, we're going to continue including cooling, storage, and others. And also, up to now, we're taking an approach that is sort of technology agnostic. We want to give the opportunity for the users to compare technologies and compare them versus applications. EGS, AGS, and hydrothermal include their, let's say, techno-economical boundary conditions, because it's one of them, we have them separately. We also want to allow the users to work with the tool without the use of sliders. We're going to be implementing AI, generative AI, large language models, agents that are going to be able to interface with the user in a different way, so that the user can actually work in a single point to look at optimization and ask, should I do power or heat? And the tool will reply based on the calculations that it does together with tests. Or we can go beyond the single point and start looking at how to compare multiple locations going beyond, going into the technoeconomics. And in that direction, we're also exploring the way to integrate tests with capacity expansion models, because what we also want our users to be able to do is to use this tool to set the baseline of costs for geothermal, what is the supply curve for the different technologies in geothermal, and be able to implement them into capacity expansion models, where we will be combining geothermal with the other sources of energy and make them compete, let's say, putting initially a as is a scenario or an optimistic scenario looking into the future and comparing what is the role of geothermal in those scenarios for the, let's say, the next decade, and the next decades, whenever we're going into the, let's say, net zero scenarios. That's what I had to share for the test tool. Drew, back to you for the Q&A.
Thanks, Danny. Really appreciate it. And I am grateful for everyone on the team to go through their various parts of the demo. We could have probably done an hour plus for each of the sections that we condensed into 10 or 15 minutes. And for the test tool, we could have done many different examples of projects of a coal plant or an industrial facility or a military base in other parts of the country. But in the interest of time, we weren't able to do that. So we're 3 minutes till close. We can maybe go a little bit extra if there are some folks that have burning questions. But before I turn it over to you, if you have any questions, I just want to highlight that at the bottom of the tool in the GeoMap, there's a little screen that says, there's a link that says provide feedback. So if, as you're using the tool, and thanks, Chloe, for showing that, it's down there at the bottom where Chloe is circling her cursor. If, as you're using the tool, you've got some ideas for how to make this tool better, or some burning questions, click on that button. It'll pop up and we'll see it. And also, for those of you that have some additional questions that we may not have time to get to today, my email was in the chat and in the calendar invite. And if you have a burning question, I can get it to the team and we can try to get that answered. So with that, if there are any questions, please go ahead and raise your hand and we'll try to get to them.
I have one here from Harvey that I can address verbally, if that helps.
Yeah, please, Helen.
Harvey, you were asking what of the data is owned by the public. Obviously, yes, we have public domain databases in there, like assist. But the majority of the subsurface data has been created new for Project Innerspace via 7 external grants employing over 85 scientists globally. And these data layers will remain within Project Innerspace's funded grant project until December 2025, when then they'll be published freely under Creative Commons. So that's, I think, addresses most of your questions, hopefully.
Yeah, and to the question in the chat just now, this demo will be video linked on our website, which will be on YouTube. So yes, this will live in perpetuity, so people can look at it and go at it at their own speed and learn by doing. And there's been a lot of really active questions in the chat, which we're appreciative of, but even more appreciative of all the great positive feedback that we've seen here, because it is a pretty cool tool, and there's a lot of pretty amazing things that can be done. So unless anyone has a final burning question, I think we'll go ahead and adjourn. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time in attending this today. And as you explore and play with the tool, please let us know how we can make it better. So thank you so much.